Hello everyone and welcome back. Today we are going to talk about a very important topic known as APIs or application programming interfaces. So let's go ahead and start the session. This is going to be the agenda for today. We are first going to introduce you to what API is. We are going to talk about what are APIs, what are some common example of APIs, and then we'll also talk about what are the use cases of API in any kind of business. Then we'll talk about some details of the APIs, where we'll talk about what is the request response, what is payload and endpoints. We'll talk about the status and body, and we'll create an API together, like a specs of an API together for the LinkedIn API. And then we'll talk about API product management, as in if you are a product manager, what are the responsibilities that you have, like a high level overview of responsibilities that you might have as a product manager who is managing an API. And then I'll also give you some kind of resources so you can go ahead and take your learning to the next level. So this is going to be the agenda for today. Let's go ahead and start the session. So I'm sure you might have seen these kind of products or apps. So the first example is from Uber, or you can consider any kind of cab service out there, cab aggregator service out there. So what happens is that this is the Uber interface, where you could see that there is a map and there is also a payment option. So you could see that this app is possible because there are certain kind of service or systems working together. In the Uber interface, this app is being fetched from Google Maps, while an API such as Braintree API or the Paytm API or the Stripe API is used for payments. So multiple systems are working together to make sure that Uber is able to function. Similarly, if you take any of the banking app or an app such as Cred, which helps you understand your credit score, there you will understand that Cred does not know your credit score. The credit score is actually coming from a third party service, which is also known as the Civil or CRIF or Experience. These are the services which maintain your credit score. These are also known as credit bureaus. Similarly, on the third type of very popular application is the booking.com or Paytms of the world, where you could book flight tickets at one place. Like you can go ahead and choose any of the flights and you can book it from one place. Here also, all of these flights such as Indigo, Go Air, Lufthansa, Air Asia, they have made sure that they are able to integrate with the Paytm system so that they are able to get the bookings from the system and also give the status updates to the Paytm system. So understand here, the moral of the story is, in order to make sure that the Uber is working, various systems have to work together. Similarly, in a fintech app, various systems has to work together in order to make sure that this functionality is available. Similarly, in any of the booking site, or there are so many examples where various systems work together in order to make sure that the use case is delivered to you as a user. So that is the use case of API. Okay, how do they work together with each other? Is through an API. API is the application programming interface, because of which different kind of tech systems are able to work with each other. So Google Maps might have given an API to Uber through which they can fetch the Google Map data into their system. Braintree, Stripe or Paytm might have given a payment gateway API to Uber in order to make sure that they are able to collect payment across the credit cards and banks of the world. Similarly, booking.com is using the API that is given by different kind of airlines, different kind of hotels to make sure that they are able to go ahead and take the bookings and give the status updates to these kind of original suppliers. So this is what APIs are used for. So APIs are a way for the tech systems to communicate with each other. There has to be a common system through which these people can talk with each other, and that is made possible by APIs or the application programming interfaces. So how are APIs useful? One use case is very obvious to you, that in order to make sure that the complete functionality of the product is there, APIs are used. For example, at Uber, Cred, Booking.com, in order to go ahead and fetch information from different websites or different products, you need to use their APIs. Uber is using Google Maps, Cred is using Experian or CRIF or any other credit bureau. Similarly, the Booking.com is using different kind of airlines website, airline APIs in order to give you the one seamless experience. The second use case of API is to communicate with internal systems. Yeah, so in the three-tier architecture, we have talked about how backend, frontend, and database are working together in a system. Now, if these three also need to work with each other, they need to talk with each other, they also have to have a standardized way. There also APIs are used. So a backend will give an API to the frontend, which it can use in order to go ahead and make sure that data is passed from and across the frontend to the backend. Similarly, the third kind of use case is there are many businesses such as Google Maps, such as Stripes, which are actually going ahead and giving their API as a service as a business. Okay, so there are so many examples. You could see that Google Map API is available to so many location-based services such as Uber, such as Booking.com, such as Airbnb, such as Swiggy, such as Ola, and so many examples out there. So Google is actually making a lot of money from the same. Similarly, if you want to buy any stock from Zerodha or Robinhood or ICICI Direct or anywhere, they should be using some kind of API that is given by the Nasdaq or the National Stock Exchange, so that they can go ahead and fetch the data and get whether the trade is possible or not. So all of these details are given by, for the share market, so all the data for the Indian stock market to Zerodha is given by the National Stock Exchange or the Bombay Stock Exchange APIs. Okay, so 3 use cases of APIs. First, it makes sure that the complete functionality of the product is there. Then it makes sure that various systems within your product are able to talk with each other, such as backend, frontend, and the database. And third is, you can also go ahead and offer your business altogether as an API, so that you can go ahead and have some kind of business model based on the same. Now, this is like a elaborated example of the first part, which is booking.com is going ahead and they are connecting with Indigo, SpiceJet, Lufthansa, and other kind of airlines. And then you as a user are able to see this. So this is the API provider and this is the API consumer. Similarly, for second example, you can see that the front end, back end are connected to each other through an API. So you can take an analogy to a waiter and to a chef and to you as a consumer. So you are the consumer who is giving instruction to the API that go ahead and get this information for me, or go ahead and store this information for me. Okay, this API is going to go ahead and take the requirements or the instructions from you, and they are going to give it to the backend. And backend will decide whether they have to go ahead and acknowledge or complete your instructions or not. So a very good analogy is the restaurant example out there. And then the third part is API as a business. So there are so many businesses which are offering their product as APIs. So for example, WhatsApp business API is one that is making a lot of wealth through their business API that they have created, because so many people use WhatsApp. Second is Stripe. Stripe is a payment gateway. There are other payment gateways as well, which are actually their main business model is the API that they offer, so that you do not have to talk. If you are a business looking to sell something, and if you want to accept money, then you do not have to talk to so many banks, because people can have different kind of banks accounts out there. You can only talk to Stripe, and Stripe will make sure that all the backend integrations are possible through a simple to use API. And then we have Algolia. Algolia is a company which actually offers an API through which you can implement search on your website, out of box search in your website, and various websites such as Hacker News and all are actually using Algolia's API in order to build search on their platform. So just to repeat, application programming interface or APIs are a way for tech system to talk with each other. Uber can talk to Google because of API. Your front end can talk to your back end because of an API. This is the use case of API. Now, what are the pros and cons of API? So pros of APIs are very simplistic to understand. So it reduces the time to ship. So imagine a situation when Uber has to go ahead and do all the imaging of the world and create these kind of maps in order to just build a cab service on the top of it. So it is going to be a lot of work. So Google Maps have made sure that this solution, the map solution, is provided to them out of the box. They don't have to do anything about the same. They just have to pay. So it reduces the time to ship. That's the first part. Second part is you get an added functionality without going ahead and committing a lot of money. And then standardization is you go ahead and get some kind of standardized principle that yes, if someone has to go ahead and talk to your product, they have to use these standards. It also helps you build internal systems and scalable systems and have sync between your developers, because there is standard that you are following. Okay. Similarly, the cons of having an API is that it is going to be an added cost, because now Uber has to pay incrementally to Google when they are going ahead and using the Google Map API into their system. And it actually was an event that happened in 2017-18 when Google has suddenly increased their cost of their APIs by almost like 4x or 14x. I'm not remembering the number, but they have increased substantially. So that is also like challenge for you. That could be a challenge for your business. Similarly, dependency. When we are using certain kind of APIs in your product, you are actually creating dependencies. So it happens that you want to buy something, but the payment gateway is down. That business has created the dependency on the payment gateway. So this is going to be there. These are some of the cons of APIs. Okay. And even because of like, this is such a big problem that there are solutions such as Just Pay, which are going ahead and aggregating all of these payment gateways. So they will understand which payment gateway is likely to work, which is not down, and they are going to suggest you a better gateway. So there is an API which is actually sitting on a lot of APIs of payment gateway. So many things are possible with APIs. So now let's talk about how an API works. Before I go started, let me tell you that what I'm telling you is an standardized way. The developers can decide how the APIs are going to talk with each other, but this is one of the standardized ways which is used across the globe. Okay, so now let's go ahead and talk about the same. So this is how an API works. There are two parties. One is the API consumer, the person who is going to consume the API, the system that is going to consume the API. And then there is a second party which is going to providing the API. Okay, so for example, if Uber wants to use Google Maps, then Google Maps is the API provider who is providing the data and information, while Uber is someone who is going ahead and using this particular piece of information. Similarly, if we talk about booking.com, then booking.com is a person who is actually consuming the API, while Indigo and Lufthansa and Air India are people who are going ahead and giving their API, providing the API to Indigo, to this particular company, booking.com. So how does it work? So there is going to be an API consumer who consumes the API. There is going to be an API provider who is going to provide the API, and they are going to talk to each other in order to exchange information, in order to build up a use case. So a API consumer has to send a request that I want this. Okay, so a request would contains an endpoint, as in this is the location through which the API response would be generated. Second is type. So you can do 4 things in an API. Either you can go ahead and create some data to, the second type is, the second component of an API is the type. So you can do 4 things in an API. You can either add data, you can edit data, you can delete data, or you can fetch some data. Okay, so these 4 things are possible, and for that we have 4 terms. So an API can either post, which is used for adding the data to the API. Get could be, it is used to fetch some data from the API. It is put if you want to add some data to the API, and then if it is delete, that means you want to remove some data from the API provider. So these are the 4 types of calls that an API can make. Then we have header authorization. So understand, an API might contain some additional information that will help the API provider to understand if this request is coming from the right place or not. For example, if I am trying to edit my profile on LinkedIn, or if I'm trying to go ahead and book a seat for myself on IRCTC website, then the IRCTC website or the LinkedIn should know that if it is the correct user who is allowed to make these changes or make a booking or not. Okay, and for that they need to identify, and that is why we have header which contains additional information to make sure that the right person is being authorized to do this particular action. And then in the end we have payload data. So in order to make your request more contextual, you have to send some kind of data. For example, if you want to edit information, what is the information that you want to edit? If you are looking to get some information, what is the information that you want to get? If you want to put some information on the API, then what is the kind of information that you are putting? If you want to delete something, what is it that you want to delete? All of this information would be contained in the payload or the data. So this is how the request works. So this information, this request will be sent to the API provider. The API provider, based on whatever the use case is, they are going to run some algorithm, do some kind of data changes, and give the response back to the API consumer. Understand, API consumer does not need to be aware of what the API provider is doing at the backend. That is none of their concern. The API provider has to take care of all of this, and API consumer is only taking care of what is the data that they need in return. So request has been sent for this particular thing. Now the API provider will generate a response for the API consumer. So the response might contain the status, which is whether your request was successful or there was some kind of error or there was some kind of issue. And then there is going to be a content or message, as in, yes, you have asked for this data and this is the data that you have got. If it is an error, they will throw an error message. If the request is successful, they will give you some kind of data that you have asked for. So this is how this is structured. To give you a bit more detail, so this is a terminology that is related to APIs. I have talked about endpoints, request and response. Endpoint is the place where the API has been hosted, so that you know that yes, this is where the real code or the real provider of the API is. Then we have the request that is sent by the API consumer to the API provider. Then we have the response that based on the request, whatever is the response generated by the API provider is going to be sent to the API consumer. Then the request might contain the type, as in if it is a post request, then it is going to add a resource. If it is a put request, then it is going to edit a resource. If it's a delete request, then it is going to delete a resource. And then if it's a get request, it is going to get a resource. Then there are headers. They are used to make sure that the right kind of person is going ahead and accessing the same. And also if there is any additional information that has to be sent with each and every request, that would be contained in the headers. And then we have a payload. So payload is the data that has been sent along with the request. So it could be in the form of JSON or XML. In the initial session, I have already told you what JSON or JavaScript object notation is. And talking about the response, so the response also contains 2 parts. First is a header. Okay, so the header will contain status. Status is what is the status of your response. What is the status of your response? So it will have 4 things. So every time a status request is going to start from a particular number. It could be 200, 201, 203, 204 and all, and it could also start from 5, 4 and 3. Okay, so if it starts with 2, that means that your request has been successful and this is the data that you have. If it is an error that is starting from 5, that means that there is some error at the server. Maybe they are not able to connect with the database. Maybe this kind of information is not available on the database, or maybe it could be possible that at this point of time API is not available. You might have seen that when you try to go ahead and look at a website that is having a lot of load, it is going to show you some kind of 500 or 501 error out there. Okay. Similarly, 4xx error, such as 400, 401, 403, 404 error is occurring when the client itself has sent the wrong kind of request. For example, the request does not contain right kind of authorization headers, or the resources that you are asking for is not available. For example, when you go ahead and type mistype URL, or if you type a wrong URL in your Chrome browser, it is going to tell you that there is a 404 error, which means that your request was wrong. This URL does not exist on the server. Okay, so that is the 4xx error. And then there is 3xx error, which is 30, 301, 302. These kind of errors are used when the resource that you are asking for has been displaced to some other resource. So initially, yes, this resource was there, but now this API has become older. So now you should go ahead and go to the new API, or go to the new resource in order to get this information. So these are the 4 kind of status messages that the API can throw at, API provider can throw at the API consumer in its response. Now there is body. So based on whatever information that you are asking, if you are asking for maybe Google Maps, then it will give you a map sheet. If you are asking for a credit score, then it will give you the credit score. If you are asking for maybe how much is the availability of seats in your airlines, then it will give you the required kind of data. Okay, so that is all contained in body. Body could be in the form of JSON, XML, or any of the data that has been communicated, that has been decided among the API provider and the consumer. Now we'll go ahead and try to create LinkedIn API. Okay, so we'll only consider 4 use cases. We'll first talk about if someone signs up on LinkedIn, what are the possible APIs that are called. Then we'll talk about edit profile. If someone wants to go ahead and edit their profile on LinkedIn, what is going to happen at the API. If I want to see all of my friend requests or connection requests out there, what is the kind of API that is being built over there? Then we'll talk about create post and delete post. Okay, so this is going to be a very simplistic exercise so that you understand how API creators are thinking out there. Now, the first thing is create user. Okay, so you know that whenever you want to go ahead and create an account on LinkedIn, this is the form you have to fill. Okay, so you have to fill your first name, last name, email, and password. Okay, so this is how it is going to look from the viewpoint of an API. Okay, so this API would be provided by the backend. Okay, and the front end will have to make sure that they are calling this API. So here, the front end would be the API consumer, while the backend would be the API provider. Okay, so this API would be provided by the backend out there. Okay, so this is going to be the information. So endpoint would be, we have just taken an example endpoint. This is not correct. LinkedIn could have chosen any endpoint that they want. Okay, so here the API endpoint is api.linkedin.com/create_user. Okay, this is the URL that the API is resting at. After this, there has to be a payload, as in I have to make sure that I am able to give LinkedIn what is the data has to be added. So I have put in my name, Ankit Shukla, and I have put in the email ID over here. Understand this information will be fetched from this particular form. Okay, so this is the payload. And then there has to be a method. Method is post, because I'm going ahead and adding some data to LinkedIn. Okay, and then I'll send this request to the LinkedIn API. And once the LinkedIn API has got this information, it will understand first that whether this information is for a new user or not. If it is not for a new user, it is going to throw an error that no, this user already exists. You should go ahead and tell them to log in. If it is a new user, exactly a new user, then it will go ahead and enter this in the database. But from the API, it will only send a response that yes, 200, this request has been successful. And now this is the new user ID of the person. So this is how the create user API is going to work on LinkedIn. So you need endpoint, payload, and method, and then you need body and status. Okay. Now the second use case is edit profile. If I want to edit my profile on LinkedIn, I'll go ahead and go to edit profile on section, and then I can go ahead and change my name and all of these information out there. What is going to happen over there from an API? Let us understand. So here the endpoint could be different. Maybe the endpoint is added_user. This is going to be an URL. Then there has to be a header. Understand? Everyone should only be able to go ahead and edit their own profile, not anyone else's. That is why you need some kind of authentication code that is generated uniquely for that particular user. Okay, so that when this information is being sent to the API should be able to understand if this is the right user or not. After this, there will be a payload, as in the payload, I'll mention whatever is the name change that I have done. Okay, and then my user ID will also be there. User ID is important so that I know for which user I have to go ahead and change this information. And this user ID should at least match with this authentication code that yes, the user ID that is being sent to me is actually authorized to go ahead and do this particular change. And then the method would be put. The method is put because we are editing a resource. So there are 4 methods: post, put, delete, and get. So here we are using put, which is used to edit some information. Now this information will go to this request, will go to the API, and API will generate a response. Okay, it will go ahead and say that name, now new name is Ankit Shukla, and now the status is 200. So I've just gone ahead and changed my name from Ankit Shukla to Ankit Shukla on LinkedIn, and this is how the API is working at the backend. After this, let us consider one more case. I want to show all connection requests from LinkedIn. Okay, whatever, I should go my network and I should be able to see all of the connection requests that are out there. Okay, so in order to get this information, what I will do, I will create this kind of API. Okay, so whenever I go ahead and go onto that page, this kind of API is being called. So what is happening here? So in order to make this API of show all connection requests, this is going to be the request. So in the request, there is an endpoint. Okay, so the endpoint would be this, like we have just taken a sample endpoint, which is connection_r, which should be there on the LinkedIn server. And then authorization. Authorization is important over here because I should be able to see only my connection request, and everyone's connection request is going to be different. So identification is very important. After this, the payload. The payload would contain the user for which I am looking for the connection request, and also the count. Am I looking for 5 connection requests, 10 connection requests, 20 connection requests? There will be a default number, but you can also send a count over there. Similarly, the method is going to be get. I am just getting some information. I am not editing or adding any kind or delete any kind of information. So the method is going to be get. Then the response would be, so what will happen over here is that the API will get this information, it will get the user ID. Then it will search in the database who are the people who have gone ahead and recently sent this person a connection request. It will go ahead from the database, it will fetch all of the IDs, profile pictures, and account links for these people because all of these are mentioned over here. Okay, it will go ahead and create a response. So all of this is happening at the API at the backend. The consumer does not have to think about all of this. Okay, you just have to make this request and send it, and everything is going to happen at the backend at the API. And the API will send you a well-prepared list of all of these things. And then there is the status code of 200. So now the client consumer can take all of this data and it can put it together in the form of a nicely written HTML page. So this is how the all connection request page is going to be created with an API. And now let us see how do we create a post. So in create a post, I have this pop-up. I can go ahead and write the text out there. Right now, for the simplicity, we are only considering the text-based post, not images or something else. So what is that going to happen over here? So the request would be api.linkedin.com/create post. It could be anything, just a sample that I'm giving you. Payload would be post text and user ID, which user is posting it and what is the post text. Understand there will always be authorization for things that are going to happen after login. This is going to happen after login, so there will be an authorization. Okay, so then there would be a method. Okay, method is post because I'm adding some post to LinkedIn's database. Okay, and then the body would be, yes, this is successful. So the body would be, maybe the text would be written for the particular response, and then the status would be 200 if this is the correct this is the correct request. If, for example, I go ahead and put some characters which are not allowed, or if I go ahead and put, maybe I think LinkedIn only takes about 500 characters. If I'm putting 600 characters, then it will throw an error that no, it is not possible. So this is how the create post will be created. After this, we have delete post. If I go ahead and click on delete post, what will happen? So I can click on this 3 icons, 3 dots, then I can click on delete post. Then I'll have to understand what happens after that. So here the request would be this delete post. I have created new endpoint. Authorization should be there because I should only be able to go ahead and delete my particular information out there. And then payload is post ID. I'll enter a post ID that yes, for this post I have to go ahead and make sure that I'm deleting something. And there is method known as delete. Okay, there could also be user ID in the payload. Okay, and the method is delete. This is the important part because I'm going ahead and deleting some information from LinkedIn. And then the body response would be success or failure based on whether it is deleted or not. And status could also be 200, 500, 400 depending on what it is correct or not. Okay, so for example, here let us go ahead and understand some more things. So if, for example, the endpoint that I'm looking to talk to does not exist. Okay, for example, I've made a spelling error over here. So the status would be something 404 because the client has sent a wrong request. Similarly, if I go ahead and give an error such as if I go ahead and maybe try to, if thousands of people or millions of people go ahead and try to delete the post at once, then server would be flooded. So here it will send a 500 or something error that no, right now server does not have bandwidth to go ahead and entertain your request. Okay, so these could be some of the errors out there. This was an overview of APIs. Okay, so far we have talked about few things. Let me go ahead and revise. So we first talk about what are some examples of APIs. We talked about Uber, we talk about Cred, we talk about Paytm and Booking.com. Then we talk about what are the three kind of use cases on API. Then we talk about three examples that I have given you. And then we talk about what are the pros and cons of APIs. So APIs will help you reduce time to ship. It will give you added functionality without committing to all the development resources. It will also go ahead and provide you some kind of standardization. The cons are it will be an added cost, like an added operational cost, and also there is going to be dependency on different APIs. Then we talk about how API works. So every API should have a request, a response. Whenever two people are connecting together through a form of an API, there will be an API consumer who consumes the API. There is an API provider who is providing the API. So here there would be a request, there would be a response. The request will contain endpoint, type, header, and payload, while the provider will go ahead on the basis of the request. It is going to send the response which contains the status and also the content on the message that is delivered as a result. Whatever has happened at the backend of the provider, the API consumer does not have to think about the same. Okay, it will just send the request in a particular format and then will receive the response in a particular format. Okay, and we have taken example of LinkedIn's internal API so far. So this has been the revision. Now we will go ahead and talk about an important thing, which is API product management. Okay, understand API product management could be different at different kind of companies, but I'll take some kind of inspiration from this really wonderful book written by Marty Kagan. And in this book, he mentions that as a product manager, your responsibility is to take care of 4 risks. The first thing is valuable. You have to make sure the product is valuable. Second is you have to make sure that the product is usable. Then you have to make sure whatever product or experience that you are creating is actually feasible. And fourth is viable. I'll go ahead and try to define all 4 of these to you. And it's a very good compass to understand what is your job as a product manager is. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about the same. So valuable means that the product that you are creating is actually useful for the audience. Okay, so the consumer needs your product. It will only be valuable. It solves an important problem in the life of the user, and customers are willing to exchange money or attention in the exchange of this particular value. So that's the first part. Your product should be valuable. The second part is usable. So the user should be able to go ahead and use the product really well. So here, mostly designers are going to play a very important role, but you as a product manager can do the right kind of user research and bring your point towards the designer so that they can go ahead and use this data in order to create better products. The third part is feasible. Okay, here you have to understand that your engineers are going to go ahead and create these kind of solutions or products, and engineers play an important role in making sure that if it is feasible to create this kind of product or not. Okay, here you as a product manager can go ahead and talk about how the software development lifecycle works, understand it really well, understand the developer empathy, understand performance, scalability, and security if you are talking about an API. Okay, similarly, if you again go back to the usability, if you are a product manager of an API, you have to make sure that the documentation is correct so that other people can use it, and also the ease of use. Your API should not be very complicated to go ahead and use. There has not to be like a lot of setup costs out there. Otherwise, other developers will not use your API. And then the last part is viable. Okay, so you have to understand the business objectives. Okay, whether the API that you are creating aligns with the long-term and short-term goals of the company and different departments in the company or not. So these are the 4 things that you need to take care of while you are going ahead and becoming an API product manager. Here, understand that valuable part is important for you, is the most important for you to consider as a product manager, because here the developers are going to be your consumers and you need to make sure that you can empathize with them. Okay, now to give you a case study or an example, so we'll take an interesting example of OpenAI's API. Okay, so OpenAI has created ChatGPT, and in order to make sure that you can use these kind of APIs in our own application, they have recently launched OpenAI's API. Okay, so we'll try to go ahead and break this API into these 4 components, which is valuable, usable, and feasible, and viable, and we'll try to understand what is the role that the product manager might have played over there. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about the same. So first is valuable. So in terms to understand whether this product is valuable for the developers and bigger community or not, people who are going to be the consumers of this API, we have to understand what are the use cases. So if you understand the use cases or jobs to be done really well, then you'll be able to understand that yes, this is going to be useful or not. Okay, so these are some of the jobs to be done that the developers that are going to use this OpenAI's API are going to have. Okay, so jobs to be done are, as a developer working at Notion, this is a persona, I want to use ChatGPT API so that my users can auto-generate content. Okay, so Notion has been using, the developer at Notion have gone ahead and they have integrated OpenAI's APIs to make sure that they are able to auto-create content, like auto-generate content on the fly, at least the draft of the content. Okay, so this is one use case, and as a product manager at OpenAI, you should be able to understand these kind of use cases. That is only you are going to go ahead and make sure that the product is useful for this audience or valuable for this audience. Then as a developer working at Alexa, I want to use ChatGPT API so that my users can get real life answers from their voice commands. Okay, so this is what an Alexa's developer would have in mind when they are looking to integrate ChatGPT in their own interface. And then the third part is, maybe I'm an indie developer, I'm a independent developer. I want to use ChatGPT API so that I can go ahead and create a small chatbot business. So I can go ahead and go ahead and create a small business which creates chatbot through OpenAI's API and then send it to small businesses out there. Okay, so as a product manager, this is your prime responsibility. Understand the use cases of the thing that you are creating. In API, you have to empathize with the developers, what they would want to create with these kind of APIs. Okay, so this is the valuable part. So you should be understanding what your API does, how it helps content, how it helps your users, what is the context, and then what is the persona of your particular audience. And Job Should Be Done is a very good framework to go ahead and understand all of these things. The second part is usable. You have to make sure that people, even if they are developer, they should be able to go ahead and make sure that they are able to understand and use your API really, really easily. Okay, so here they have done very beautiful things. If you go to OpenAI's API page, you are going to see that they have created so many helpful guides. Okay, that you can go ahead and quick start. We have gone ahead and given some kind of sample applications to you already so that you can go ahead and get started as soon as possible. Similarly, they have made sure that no matter what kind of language that you code in, like all the common languages such as Java, Python, JavaScript, they have made sure that their libraries, OpenAI library, are available in the same. So no matter what language you use, there is like a bundle of OpenAI functions, OpenAI's API, that you can go ahead and use in your own language. So that is also like thought through from the usable angle of an API. So this is also like something that a product manager can pitch in. Now the third part is feasible. Okay, what is the role that you as a product manager can play in feasibility when engineers are working? Okay, because understand in feasibility, most of the time engineers have to play a role. So you can go ahead and assist the engineers, help them make better decisions. Okay, so first you have to understand what is the application of large language models. Okay, so the core technology behind OpenAI is that it is a large language model which is able to go ahead and talk almost like humans. Okay, so now you have to understand that yes, we have created the large language model. What are the applications of the same? So that could be your responsibility as a product manager. Then you have to make sure that the thing is scalable. You have to make sure that it is performance oriented, like people are able to get results quickly because you are talking about user experience. Then you have to talk about security, as in ChatGPT, whether it is using your own data to train itself, whether the data is secure or not. So this is going to help create a better experience and more like a secure experience to the user, that you have to tell to the developer that yes, this is how we are going to go ahead and do the same. After this, you have to manage the whole software development lifecycle. At some of the companies, the product owner or project manager or an engineering lead would be available to you to manage this, but you also need to sometimes step in order to observe if things are going in the correct direction or not. And you can also go ahead and lead experimentation. Okay, understand, ChatGPT has not created the best version of GPT in the first go. They understood that it is a far-fetched goal. We first have to make sure that we are releasing something, understanding the market segment, and parallelly we'll keep on improving the system. So they started with like GPT-2, I think a couple of years ago or 1 year ago, and then they started with GPT-3 in September, and then very recently they have launched GPT-4. So they have been moving rapidly, but there is a thought process behind the same. So you can, as a product manager, play a very important role in understanding this experimentation and then taking action based on the same. Now, the last part is viable. Okay, so viable is also an important part. So understand, viable talks about whether this product decision makes sense for your business or not. Okay, so now here you have to understand, is the cost of running model viable with pricing? So they are charging around $20 for one subscription of ChatGPT, and for API, I think their charges around few cents for particular requests out there. So they have to make sure that the cost of running this model, because it is very costly in terms of computing resources, is actually balanced with the price that we are charging, and there is a hope for the company to become profitable. So that is something that a business product manager could bring in. Then you also have to understand if we have a distribution model. Do we know enough developers? Do we have partnership with so many companies such as Figma, Notion, which have been like initial adopter of these APIs, so that our API could be going ahead and be used by and made popularized by these kind of people. So distribution is very important. Yeah. In terms of viability, you can also consider that if your partnership with Microsoft is in sync with free API access. Okay, so you can go ahead and provide all of the services that we are offering on the top of Microsoft Azure, so that people are willing to go ahead and spend some money in Azure, and maybe both of you parties are making some kind of money in the long term, and there is a sensible business model at place. Okay, so this is all about APIs. So we have gone ahead and considered what APIs are. We have talked about what are the technical parts of API, the request response headers, and the type of the request that you can send, put, post, get, and delete. And we also talk about like a LinkedIn example API. And then we talk about how, as a API product manager, you can go ahead and consider 4 important things, which is whether your product is valuable, usable, feasible, and viable. And we have taken an example of Chat, GPT, and or OpenAI's API. Okay, so this is about this session, guys, and I'll make sure that I'm including a quiz in the at the bottom of this video. Go ahead and attempt the quiz so that you make sure that you have understood this concept really nicely. And I'll also include some resources such as these. So these are few resources that I'm going to attach. Here you can find like a playground through which you can go ahead and play with different kind of APIs, like understand what request responses are. Then I have also included a resource where you can go ahead and get a list of interesting APIs which you can go ahead and try. Most of these are free APIs. And then I have also included like a resource through which you can learn a very important tool known as Postman, which will help you test APIs. Understand, as a product manager, you might not need it, but it's good to go ahead and know this kind of information if you love tinkering around things. And then last part is I have also included a blog where someone has mentioned like some cool use cases of the Chat GPT or the OpenAI's API. Okay, so that is all for today's session. We'll see each other very soon. Thank you and take care.